In today's video, I'm going to teach you how to look after leopard geckos. Leopard geckos are small, around 7 to 10 inches long. Now they can be active at any time of day, but mainly they come out at night time or at crepuscular hours, which is mornings and evenings. In the wild, these guys come from a variety of habitats, either from desert areas that are really arid or from more humid and forested areas. They can famously be found in the stone walls in the wild of Pakistan or under rocks that people flip, hunkering down next to warm objects and snoozing the day away. Now these guys can live very long lives. They can easily live up to 20 years old. The oldest leopard gecko that I know of that is still alive is 36 years old, but most are going to be in that sort of 20-year ballpark. To house an adult leopard gecko like my girl Miko here, you're going to want something like a 40-gallon tank. Babies can be started in 10 and 20-gallon tanks if you prefer, but I will say I've worked in stores and we've raised baby leopard geckos in 80-gallon tanks and done just fine, so it is possible. The problem with normal 40-gallon tanks is the top opening access. When you come in over the top and reach in over a leopard gecko, you can make them think that you're a predator, like a bird swooping out of the sky. That's why a front opening tank is more preferable. You can get cheaper front opening but still screen top versions online from Ecoflex for $150, or you can get a premium quality 50-gallon Zoo enclosure for $230. That can actually take the weight of a lot of rocks and decor for you to make an amazing home for your leopard gecko. It also has one of the best meshes on the market for actually allowing the light through it. Where are you going? I keep my leopard gecko in a 120-gallon Zoo enclosure and she is absolutely loving it. If you really want to give your special leopard gecko a massive mansion, I couldn't recommend it more. Now next up is heating and lighting our leopard geckos. Leopard geckos, like most reptiles, are cold-blooded and need external heating to do well in captivity. Providing heat to our leopard geckos can be done in two ways, via belly heat or from heat from above the leopard gecko. Now if you are going to go for belly heat, you can give them a heat mat if it's attached to a thermostat to control the temperature, and they can do quite well with belly heat. Or you can do the better way of doing it, which is what I do, which is give them a heat lamp over a basking spot. This means your leopard gecko can bask under the bulb like it's the sun, and that heat bulb is going to create belly heat anyway as a byproduct from warming up decor in the leopard gecko's setup. Personally, I think the heat lamp is much more natural to them and it gives them a 2-for-1 deal out of choices they can make about how they want to warm up. So for me, that sounds like a no-brainer. You want to place your heating at one side of the tank and then leave the other to be cool and unheated. That means it'll be much more cooler and shaded, and our leopard gecko can move to and from either side, there you go, you're thermoregulating, and choose at whatever point of the day they want. You're going to need to measure the temperature of your basking surface, whether that's under the heat lamp or actually on where the heat mat would be, by using something called a temperature gun. These are really cheap and affordable, you can find them linked down below. A basking surface temperature anywhere from 80 to 90 would do these guys just fine. So what I would recommend is getting a 50-watt heat lamp and trying that in your setup. A good bulb to try is the Exoterra Intense heat bulbs. Give that a go and then measure your basking surface temperatures. See what it achieves. If it's falling short, change to a 75 watt. If it's way too high, change down to a 45 watt or a 40 watt. She climbed into my pocket. Let's talk about UVB. It's not a bare necessity. They won't keel over and die without it, but studies have shown that leopard geckos are healthier with UVB, have more energy, experience less overall stress, it feels good, and it helps them absorb calcium more efficiently. I have UVB on my setups. You can use something like a Zoomid 5.0 or an Arcadia Shade Dweller. Something low strength like one of those would be perfect. Place it at the same end as your heat lamp so you create your little sunny patch. And yet again, leave the other end with no light to create some shade. How is this comfy for you? If you're going to go bioactive, you're going to want an LED light to grow plants. Plus it really just brightens up their tank. And it really helps your gecko dial in their body clock and their mood and their sleep cycles. Remember, we feel tired when it's dark, but leopard geckos are flipped, they're reverse. They get tired when it's light. So if we don't give them a daytime period of giving them light, it would be like keeping a human in a brightly lit room and expecting them to sleep well. They need a daytime and a nighttime. You can set your lights to come on for 12 hours on and 12 hours off. You can use a digital wall timer to achieve that. Make sure your lights are off at night. Now the air temperature in the enclosure can be anywhere from 73 to 79. You can measure this by putting a thermometer in the shaded end outside of the lights in your enclosure, and that will read an uninfluenced air temperature reading of your actual air temperatures. The temperatures can go down into the 60s at night, no problem. Beyond that, you might want to offer some supplemental nighttime heating that doesn't give off light, something like a heat mat or a ceramic heat emitter. But what you'll find is your decor probably absorbs so much warmth throughout the day that it radiates enough of it at nighttime anyway. This is a really weird feeling. I've got a leopard gecko in my pocket. Now let's talk humidity. Many keepers assume that this is a purely arid desert species, and it needs to be as dry as possible. However, in these arid environments, they will rest in holes and crevices that are really high humidity, and even in the habitats such as grassland and forest, they can experience high humidity as well. As long as your enclosure can dry out, humidity won't be a problem at all. Just make sure you give them a hide stuffed with moss that they can use as a humid retreat, and you're all good. Make sure you offer them a water bowl to drink from and change that water out every few days. My leopard gecko even has a misting system to give water droplets to drink off the walls and hides for my leopard gecko and give her that simulation of rain. As long as the tank can dry off, it won't be a problem at all. Let's cover substrate and impaction. Impaction is when a leopard gecko gets sick and cannot pass the items that it has swallowed. It gets all compacted in a gastrointestinal tract, and then at that point they might need to see a vet. This can happen with food, decor, and even substrate. But a leopard gecko needs to be really unhealthy for this to even be a risk. The biggest problems that leave leopard geckos predisposed to impaction is dehydration and metabolic bone disease. But if you follow this care guide, dehydration won't be a problem for you, and neither will metabolic bone disease. A normal, healthy leopard gecko will be totally fine. There are people that won't give any substrate because they're afraid their leopard geckos will get impaction, regardless of the health of the leopard gecko. To that I say, are you also not going to feed it? Because if it's at risk of getting impacted, the exoskeleton of insects will also cause it as well. So you're going to starve your leopard gecko to death? Or is that being silly? Substrates for leopard geckos can range from topsoil to sand mixes and creating a really loamy, soily, sandy texture. Lots of keepers love doing that mixture for their leopard geckos. I'm using Zoom Ed's Reptisoil because it comes out with that loamy texture straight out of the bag. Or if you want a more clay-like hard structure like I might find in the arid environments of Pakistan, then you can use commercial substrates such as the Jurassic bearded dragon substrate. That is sand to be taken out of the bearded dragon's habitat in Australia and is sold straight to your door. It has amazing properties that if you moisten it and then put it in your enclosure and allow your heat lamps to bake it, it will go really rock hard on the surface and limit opportunities for impaction if you're worried about that. At the end of the day, the choice is yours, but I'd recommend avoiding substrates like reptile carpet just because it can rip out the claws of leopard geckos and they can get really dirty. Miko, who is living in my pocket now, has got very few claws left because of her previous owner did something like that. Looking after and cleaning the substrate with leopard geckos is really easy. Leopard geckos actually choose a toilet area as a latrine and always poop in that area. So once you learn where that is, you can simply pick up all that poop, bag it away and throw it away, as well as excess substrate around that area, and you can replace it with fresh substrate in that spot. You can do a full change of substrate every so often if you feel that it's really dirty or foul odouring. That can be anywhere from once every few months to every 6 months to a year. It will depend on how dirty you get the setup. Once you have substrate, you're going to want to start thinking about decor. You can use natural decor such as rocks, branches, and cork, or you can use all the different plastic pieces of decor and plastic hides available. I'm using a mixture of both. Just make sure that your leopard gecko has plenty of security along the back of their enclosure so they can move up and down that gradient without being seen if they want to. Just give them that privacy and then offer them opportunities for exercise and climbing. Just because leopard geckos are a mainly ground dwelling species, it doesn't mean that they won't climb. In the wild, they've been found 5 foot up trees or up in brick walls. I offer this in my enclosure by just simply piling up some pieces of cork. So for cleaning, I'd recommend Lucillin. Lucillin is a great product. You can use it on basically everything. It's the most effective disinfectant that is completely reptile and amphibian safe. It kills many, if not all of our reptile diseases. It can be used to disinfect wounds and help with healing. It can be used to clean eggs, your equipment, and your hands. It's the only thing I use nowadays, and it is literally amazing. You can find that link down below. Let's get on to feeding our leopard geckos. Leopard geckos eat mainly insects in the wild, but they will eat small rodents rodents, other lizards, and even snakes. Now we should give them a mainly insectivorous, insect-based diet in captivity, simply because they expend way more calories in the wild and we restrict their movement in captivity, so we need to keep their diet leaner and healthier. They can eat a wide variety of live feeder insects. Try to keep it exciting and varied by swapping out different feeder insects to make sure your leopard gecko has a balanced diet. Now, baby leopard geckos can eat every day, but adult leopard geckos should only eat a couple of times a week, and then it's just a handful of bugs at a time, nothing crazy. At the beginning of your leopard gecko keeping experience, you're going to want to use rigid ideas like this to help you find your footing, but as you go forward, you need to find a feel for your leopard gecko's metabolism. Look at your leopard gecko and look at its body. Use leopard gecko body scoring charts. If you feel that your leopard gecko is getting fat, cut back on the feeding. If you feel that it's losing weight or losing body condition, increase your portion sizes. Feed a few more insects. The same leopard gecko in a 20-gallon might need way less food than the same leopard gecko in 120-gallon tanks because they're burning way more calories in the bigger environment. So it is based upon the individual, but don't worry, before long you'll have your leopard geckos feeding down to intuition. Come on. Hi. Oh, you look all sleepy. Come on. If you don't want to hang out, I'll put you back. Come on. Now, what you want to do before you actually feed off your insects to your leopard gecko is you want to gut load them. Now, gut loading is simply you feeding good nutritious foods to the feeder insects so that's in their stomach, so that when you feed that insect to your leopard gecko receives all the good nutrients that you fed to the bugs. You're going to want to keep your bugs in a ventilated container, feed them good foods like carrots, red bell peppers, butternut squash, pumpkin, and things like that. These act as a good source of moisture to hydrate the feeder insects before giving that good hydration to our leopard gecko. Feed your bugs for 48 hours and then you can feed them to your leopard gecko. In terms of other foods, you can feed them things like pinky mice. Now, I'm not against feeding them pinky mice. I just think people overdo it. To a leopard gecko, a pinky mouse is a calorie bomb, so it can be really useful at times for breeding females and recovery, but if you continuously give these calorie bombs to your leopard gecko, you can make them more predisposed to fatty liver disease because you've made your leopard gecko that fat. So if you're going to use it for a reason, and do it sparingly. Let's talk supplements. Now, to keep our leopard geckos healthy, we need to dust our feeder insects with calcium powder. The reason we do this is because leopard geckos need twice as much calcium in their blood and their diet as phosphorus. Now, the feeder insects have no bones, so they can't store calcium, but they have an exoskeleton, and it just so happens that that exoskeleton is really high in phosphorus. In the wild, those insects will be eating plants that are really high in calcium, and that's how the leopard gecko gets twice as much calcium. But in captivity, we simply just use a calcium powder because it's much easier. Now, because you've watched this guide and because you've got UVB, your life is about to get much easier. You don't need to worry about supplementing vitamin D because they're going to make their own underneath the UVB. So you just need calcium powder without D3. Just pure Ca, and then simply dust every bug that you feed your leopard gecko. Then once a week to 2 weeks, you can give your leopard geckos a feeding, but instead of calcium powder that you dust this time, you use a multivitamin. Supplementation can really be made that simple. Now let's talk brumation. Now in the wild, if winter temperatures get really cold, they'll go into a state of brumation, which is very similar to hibernation, but not so concrete. They'll come up and down based upon the temperature of the day. What I do is reduce the hours during the winter to around sort of 8 to 6 hours, reduce feeding a little bit based on body condition. Then at the end of February, turning into March, coming into spring, I'll bring the hours back up to 12 hours and start increasing feed again. Or you can just leave it all the same and carry on as normal. The leopard gecko is going to do what the leopard gecko is going to do. They might just sleep more. When you handle your leopard gecko, just make sure that you support their body weight and you don't grab them by the tail, because they can drop that tail in a predator defense mechanism and it looks really gross. Yes, it does grow back, but the tail never looks as nice as the original tail. You can weigh your leopard gecko weekly and keep track of their weights. That's really helpful for noticing change. If they change rapidly, more than 10% of their body weight in quick succession, that might be indicative that they've got parasites or some other problem. So keeping on track of that is really important to noticing things really early on. I'm launching our first official Leopard Gecko merch. For those of you that love Leopard Geckos and Jurassic Park, you're gonna love this design. We've been working with some really talented artists for this merch. In a world where everyone's cutting corners and using AI, this is a really cool way to support talented artists. You can find the link down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.